DCES for the Mandarin program is substantial. And when I say substantial, it's hovering between 45 and 55%. I don't remember the most recent number, but it's a substantial number. And that includes out-of-district students choosing to come to DCES because they want the Mandarin dual language immersion. So if you eliminate that, those families don't have a unique reason to come to Scottsdale. So the committee is designed to, as an umbrella committee, look at how do we analyze the investment in those programs, and then what are the new and emerging opportunities that might draw more families into SUSD? We had a couple of ideas that were put on the table at the outset. One was the Arts Magnet, which you heard a presentation by Jason Rose at a board meeting. The other is a Gifted Accelerated Academics Academy, floated for a couple of years by the leader at Redfield and discussed by others in terms of, is this something that could draw more kids? So there will be subcommittees from Spark looking at those two areas. We envision there'll be more. Early college is one that's been suggested, and there could be others. But this committee will continue for the foreseeable future because I think that's going to need to be an ongoing conversation. Sometimes you start something, it's really successful, and then it gets to its end of useful life, and we don't abandon it quickly enough. Sometimes we need to say, okay, that served its purpose then, and now we're going to move in a different direction. This committee will help us analyze that data more intentionally.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
I need to plug in too. Okay. Is in there? Okay. Well, I'm Shannon Crozier. I'm the CFO here in the district, and so I was asked to kind of talk about school finance and our budget. So I'm going to start out a little bit with just an overview of how we're funded, because I think that a lot of times there's question about, like, well, why don't you just generate more money? Or how do you even get the money we have? So is that going to work? That's not working. It's, yeah. Oh, thanks. There we go. So we're just going to start with looking at how public schools are funded in Arizona. We have really two types of funds. We have budget-controlled funds, and we have cash-controlled funds. Budget-controlled funds are basically money that we get from the state, and there's a formula that says this is how much you're going to generate, or a legislative appropriation for that. And what we receive is totally dependent on that formula. So for an example, M&O, or Maintenance and Operations, is a budget-controlled fund. The state says, here's the formula, which is going to tell you how much money you generate. And that's what we get. Another type of budget-controlled fund is overrides. The district has passed maintenance and operation overrides, M&O overrides, and capital overrides. That is set at a portion or a percentage of part of our budget. So those are considered budget-controlled funds. You either receive based off of a formula, or you get like a percentage that the state says you can receive if the voters approve X percentage above your budget. We're permitted to spend that budget up to that budget limit, but you can't spend more than that budget limit. And then the legislature sets that. So every single year, the legislature gets together and they say, this is how much we're gonna give you for certain things. And part of that is a base level amount, or dollar amount per student. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But they have this formula that they use that says, and this formula has actually been in place since like the early 80s. But it's a very standard, and basically what it does is it makes sure that every district is getting the same amount. So it's not like Scottsdale, who has a higher tax base, can just say, oh, we're gonna generate more money than, like, I'm going to pick on Isaac, in a lower income area, it equalizes out what school districts receive because it is a very formulated budget, a very set formula that says this is how much you get for public school education. To get the money for that, we have to do a levy or tax. So when you get your tax bill as a homeowner, you'll see how much you're being taxed for public education, and it'll break it out if it's got overrides and things on it. And that's how we actually get the cash on hand to pay things. So types of budget-controlled funds are, like I said, maintenance and operations. Think people. Maintenance operations is primarily salaries, benefits, supplies, stuff you're gonna, utilities, consumable type things. Then we also get district additional assistance or capital. That's, again, think things like tables, chairs, computers, capital type items. You can move that to M&O, which we've started to do that some. And some districts do it, some districts don't. But then that means you have less money, obviously, then to be able to buy tables and chairs and computers, software, those type of things. We have bonds. We have a bond that's pretty much over now. The last one was in 2016. We've pretty much spent all of those. But bonds are going to be the bigger things. The amount we get for capital is not going to cover major upgrades. Think HVAC or chiller units. What happened? Okay. And so a bond really helps to be able to buy like the bigger things or to do like the bigger remodeling or upkeep to a school. So one of the things that we buy out of bonds would be like buses. A bus could be $500,000-$600,000. HVAC unit could be upwards of $1 million. So those are like the big ticket things that you're never going to be able to afford necessarily through capital monies because those are big, big issues. Overrides, we have 2 of them, and the state allows for 2 different ones. We have a maintenance and operations. We have a capital. We have classroom site fund, and that years ago, think Prop 301, which is an additional, it started out as an additional sales tax that provides additional funds specifically for teachers. It's continued on classroom site fund, so we get an additional amount every single year that can be used for teachers. It's very prescriptive on how you can use it, but primarily it's used for teacher salaries. It includes some certified folks like guidance counselors, those types of folks, but it is used for performance pay and salary for those staff members. And then adjacent ways is a very tiny little thing that we do every now and then, which basically provides like easements into our properties that we've remodeled. Then we have cash-controlled funds. These don't have a formula to it. It's basically things that, that you can do that generate additional revenue. And you basically can spend as much cash as you have on hand. So types of this as gifts and donations. We have people, your parent groups are quite often donating money to a school that goes into a school's gifts and donations account. We have other organizations like Safeway and Target and things that'll donate money. That goes into gifts and donations. Tax credits, rental monies. So if, we have the soccer teams out on Saturday that are using our fields, we charge them a rental fee for using those. That goes into a rental account. Indirect costs. For most of our federal grants, they allow to take indirect cost. There's a set percentage you can take. So we take a percentage of that. We also get 18% of the federally reimbursed meals through food services. So not all of the food service accounts, but the things that are federally reimbursed, like for Title I, those or free and reduced students, those things we can take 18% from food services. And that generally is about $800,000, $900,000 a year. We get Medicaid reimbursement and then community education. Those are our cash account codes. So it's not like a set, we know we're gonna get a specific amount every single year. It's what you generate is what you have, and you might be able to depend on it, or if you spend it all and you don't generate more, then it's gone. Yeah.
What's the biggest gift SUSD's ever got for a specific school? Do you know offhand?
I'm gonna say probably the football field house at Chaparral and or the field. They actually at one point I think also paid for part of a field at Chaparral, but I would say Chaparral. The turf field. and then the field house. Definitely Chaparral Athletics. Yeah. Yeah. This just kind of takes a look at where our money comes from. So when you look at like all of our budget, this looks at where does the money come in from? And so you can see the biggest bulk of our money is our M&O. That comes from taxes, that comes from that state. It's a budget controlled account, comes from the formula that the state has for M&O. So that's people and consumables. But you can see there too, you know, we have the bond is in there, capital, cash accounts. But really the two biggest things in there are M&O, and then our cash accounts. And that's made up of all the cash accounts. So that could also include things like student activities and clubs, or things that have like very regulated how you can spend those cash accounts. About between 400 and 500 million, and that includes cash and everything. Yeah. So when you're looking at how do we actually spend all those funds, and again, this is looking at not just M&O, this is looking at all funds. Again, the bulk of that is in salaries and benefits. Just over 80% of our entire budget, well, particularly in M&O, 80% of our budget is salary and benefits. So when we start talking about, hey, we've got to cut things, the biggest spot to cut, unfortunately, is salary and benefits, which affects people. The next highest area tends to be utilities, so water, electricity, that's a few $1 million. We have a lot in purchase service. We're trying to deal with that. Some of that has to do with, one, we do a phased retirement where you retire and you come back through a company and work for us. So you're still working for us, but we pay a company for you to come back. That's about $1 million. But we also know that we're doing a lot of purchase services for special ed, and that could be in the form of transportation services that being contracted out, but that's also in the form of tuition out to private schools, and we've cut back on this for this year, but one of the big expenses we had in the past was having to bring in contracted folks to work with some of our students because we weren't able to hire them. We're trying to make progress towards it, but it's a lot more expensive when I have to pay a company to do something than if our own staff can do it, in most cases. Not always, but most cases. So that also gives you a clue of when we start talking about, you know, where do we cut, cutting supplies is not gonna really make a huge dent. The places that have the money are our salaries and benefits. And again, this is all funds, but when we look at last year versus this year's budgeted, within salaries, the bulk is certified, as it should be. Certified are our teachers, but certified includes teachers, guidance counselors, psychologists, social workers, all those certificated employees. So the bulk of those end up being within the classroom or on campus, as they should be, followed next by classified. So that's gonna be like your facility workers, your nutritional service workers, bus drivers, clerical staff, those are your classified folks. Then we broke out administration. So we have district administration, which is gonna be like, you're an administrator and you work at the district level. So it's gonna be like myself, Dr. Menzel, our assistant superintendents, directors, those types of folks. And then school admin, which is gonna be your principals and assistant principals. So as you can tell, when we start talking again, when we say we need to make budget cuts, the bulk of our budget is in salary and benefits, and the bulk of that is in certified and then classified. So I said M&O is a budget controlled, it's set by a formula. The biggest driving force within our M&O budget is how many students are enrolled. Yeah. I don't know that number right off the top of my head. There are more district admin than there are school admin. No, I'm sorry. Flip that. There are more school admin that I'm thinking, because there's assistant principals, multiples at high schools and whatnot. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. But we have a lot of district admin that are fairly low paid, right? So an example would be my finance director, I believe, is paid less than a principal. So we have directors that are paid less than what a principal would be making in some cases. And we have some admin that are like coordinators. They're making, a maintenance supervisor is making probably 65,000. So they're not super high paid either. Well, part of it is we made a big push this year. Well, so some of this is budgeted. So keep in mind too, the previous year is what did we spend? The current year is what? We don't always spend the entire budget. I still have to budget for a position whether or not I fill it or not. We also, for this fiscal year, to get off of purchase services within special education, we made a big push and added a pretty significant stipend to attract special ed teachers, paras, those types of things. And so that, some of that, well, paras wouldn't, but certified teachers would fall in that. So we've made some efforts to really bump that up. Plus we gave 2% raises for this. No, we have 1% for this year. 1% for this year. Yeah, so that's part of it. It really depends. I mean, it depends on which plan you're on and if you have family or whatnot. We had one plan that didn't go up at all. So if you were on that plan, your benefits did go up. But benefits could also be, I mean, that's not just medical. That could be like as your salary goes up, the amount that you contribute towards state retirement and taxes or what also goes up. And again, keep in mind, budgeted is an assumption that if we paid everything out.
So I guess my question is, I've heard some people say that even though the teachers got raises, that the cost of their benefits kind of negated that?
Yeah, if you were on if you were on a PPO plan or you were on the, we have 4 plans. So if you were on the PPO plan, your medical went up significantly. So that's why I say it depends on which plan you went on. If you're on the PPO, we know that the PPO plan is what we're generating in payments into that plan and what the costs actually are way out of alignment. So we increased the cost pretty significantly on the PPO plan. So if you were on that plan, you very well probably did lose. The 2% that you received did not cover the amount of increase on the,
1%.
or 1%. We've been giving 2 for a while. 1% that we gave did not cover the amount of increase if you were on that PPO plan. If you were on one of the other HSA plans, it may or may not. It just depends on which plan you were, which plan and if you're doing single or family. So
Okay.
I can't give on
Thank you.
average, yeah. Okay. So within the M&O budget, it is budget formulated. The biggest driver of that is how many students we have. And it's not even just like what is our enrollment. We talk about our enrollment is declining. Enrollment contributes to what's called average daily membership. And the way the state funds this is they say you get X amount of dollars per student based on a weighted count, student weighted count. That comes from what is your 100th day average daily membership. And the way they calculate that is they look at who's enrolled and what grade levels for the first 100 days. So if you are a first grader and you start with us on day 1 and you are here through day 100, you are 1 ADM. But if you're a first grader and you start with us on day 10 and you're here day 10 through 100, we're only getting 0.9 ADM for you. If you start with us on day 105, so you basically are you start with us in February, because our 100th day is January 21st. So you start with us in February, it doesn't generate any ADM because it's after the 100th day. Well, if they start on day 1 and day 90, I get that 0.9 for them. The other part of that is that kindergarten is only funded half day in Arizona. So for every single kindergartner, if the kindergartner is here for the whole first 100 days, it's still only a 0.5 ADM because they only fund for part day kindergarten. Now, we have an M&O override that we use to pay for the other half of that. But when we talk about the funding that we get, and if people look at enrollment, that number does not equate to exactly what we get for ADM. Then we get some weights. So every grade level has a weight. So K-8 all get the same weight. 9-12 get a little bit higher weight. We get some additional money. So if you are, in grades K through 3, we get some money for Move On When reading, additional reading programs. Special education has additional weights, free and reduced, and gifted. And all of that combined becomes what is called the total weighted student count.
Sick for a week, does that take 7 days off of my?
Well, that's a
100?
really interesting thing that has come up in the last year. The state has started doing what they call unfunded intervals. So if you're sick and you're out for, 3 days, does that impact us? No. If you're chronically sick or you're just deciding, I'm gonna pull my kid out all the time because I wanna go on vacations, and then also they get sick and maybe they just don't feel it that day, and they end up missing 10% of the 180 days that we're in school, they start looking for 10-day intervals, and they will not fund for that. And it's kind of a convoluted formula that they're using, but they are starting to look at when you have kids, unless they have some documented chronic illness, if we have students that are missing a lot of school for various reasons, they're going to start cutting back on the funding for those students. So there is that hit us last year, and is a big conversation that's starting to happen within all school districts, because they're looking at it saying, this is gonna cost us, and it's thousands of dollars. I think for last year for us, it was somewhere around $8,000. But I mean, we're really good about our attendance at our schools. A lot of districts don't have the attendance levels that we're really pushing for, but that is starting to become a big concern.
Is that 10 days in a row or 10 days in total of the year?
If they've missed a certain amount of school, then if they have 10 days in a row, that's
Then
what they're
they're taking
unfunding.
off.
Unfortunately,
Okay.
we're seeing that kids are they're taking off big chunks of time, or for whatever reason, parents just aren't getting them to school. Only in the first 10. So if you're not enrolled, like if you don't show up in the first 10 days, you're unenrolled. But if you've been going to school and then you're out for 10 days, they don't unenroll you.
So there have been some,
If it's, okay, unexcused, yeah.
is that only consecutive or is that total? Because we've talked about this, but there are scary emails going around about total attendance.
For the unenrollment, that would be consecutive absences. So what some people have done to avoid getting dropped is that they'll show up for one day and then they'll start missing again. So people will game the system. Still impacts us in terms of how the state calculates the funding, but from a standard operating procedure based on Arizona law, 10 consecutive, unexcused, and you get dropped from enrollment. And the attendance ones that look scary in some respects might be the high school ones that talk about potential loss of credit, which is a different conversation. That's a district policy, not a state law.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Did you have another question?
Do you think parents are aware that attendance matters to the school district's budget?
I think parents are aware that attendance matters here at Scottsdale. I don't know if they're aware of it as much as other districts. The unfunded part is pretty new, and so it hasn't been.
Is that a law or is it the unfunded part? Is that like a state policy?
I'm going to say state policy because there's people questioning it. Yeah. Okay. So you get a weighted count, then you get an amount per student. The state sets that. They are required right now to increase that by inflation up to 2%. So if inflation is 1.5%, that's only going to increase required by 1.5%. During the post-COVID years, when inflation was as high as 8%, in some cases they funded it a little bit more, but they were only required to fund 2%. They never funded it at the full amount of what inflation really is. So we kind of set on 2%. We've had a couple years where the state said, hey, we've got we're feeling good about our budget, so we can do a little bit more than the 2%, or they've done some one-time funding situations, but they're only required to increase that by 2% or whatever inflation is. So we are anticipating for next year that will be the 2%. We do get some additional funding for transportation. We've passed, the community has passed an M&O override. We get some funding for what's called desegregation. That goes back to a lawsuit back in the early 80s. There's about 8 school districts that get it, and it provides about a little over $7 million to the district. It has to be used for certain things, so we use it for like ELD programs or some gifted programs, and it's back to what that court case was referring to, or OCR was referring to. We have dropout prevention, $221,000. Prop 123 has technically kind of gone away. This was additional funding that we got off of the lawsuit challenging how the state was funding schools. It's technically gone away. They gave it to us this year. I think they'll continue to give it to us. It's about $1.3 million. There's a lot of talk. There was talk last year. I'm hearing talk again this year about wanting to figure out something with it. We just don't know what that's going to look like. Then we've gotten some one-time funds, and those are great. A couple years ago, we got $5 million. That was great but then the next year you don't have that $5 million. We've gotten some one-time funds for DAW and free and reduced lunch. It's been about $800,000. We've gotten it 2 years in a row, so I always find it funny one-time funds that you get more than once. But I'm not projecting that we're going to get that this year. So, and then we have our budget carry forward, and that becomes our M&O budget. Go ahead.
Are those pots in the last slide, are they fixed amounts like the transportation M&O override, or are they based
Yeah.
on
Transportation
students?
is a set amount. It's just over $8 million. M&O override is 15% of, it's called our revenue control limit. It's within the funding formula. So that's been about $21 million. Yeah, if ADM goes down, that brings our revenue control limit down. That brings the M&O override down. DSEG is set at what it was like 15 years ago. So that's just over $7 million. Dropout is set. It's always $221 million. I'm sorry, 221,000. And then the Prop 123 is again based off of a formula of how many we get a portion of based off of our ADM. And then budget carry forward really depends on how much we carry forward from our prior year budget, which has been going down. We'll talk about that. A couple things that are really impacting their budget. Obviously, the biggest driver of our budget is declining enrollment, which impacts our ADM. Ours has been going down. We have been reducing our budget carry forward. 2 things have impacted that. One, I think we all know that it costs more to do anything in this world. That's the same for us as it is for you. But also, a couple years ago, the governing board, we had recommended a 1% salary increase. The governing board says, no, we really want you to do 2%, and you have all this carry forward, so use that. Well, carry forward is kind of one-time monies. It's like dipping into your savings. Once you dip into your savings, you don't have that money. But a salary increase is a forever thing. So that's impacting our carry forward. And then, like I said, we've received some additional one-time funds that I don't anticipate again. So what does that mean for our budget for this year? We are projecting that our total weighted student count will reduce by 609. That might be a little high. We know that we have closed 2 schools this year. We know enrollment is going down. So we factored that reduction in, but that's a reduction of about 2.3%. We know that our base level should go up 2%. So we already have a reduction there of about $500,000. Our budget balance carry forward, I'm bringing it down by $1.9 million. That'll put it at $8 million. And that's just because, like I said, we're bringing that down every single year. We are getting to a point where we're about to be, our board regulation says 4%, and we're getting close to that as the minimum. And then $800,000 in one-time funds. So with that, We are projecting a reduction of $3.3 million based off of our declining enrollment and the reduction of carry forward dollars. Yeah.
Just wondering, you may have thrown this number out before, but what's the rough estimate that we're going to save from closing the schools? Those 2 schools that have been
Yeah.
decided.
Between the two, like maybe 2.5
Okay.
between the two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And this just looks like, I told you our carry forward, as you can see, during the COVID years, we were getting extra money, we had more in. We had a year, that 19 million that you see in 25, jumping from 14 to 19. Like I said, we got $5.4 million in one-time funds. We rolled that to the 25 school year, and then we spent it in 25 on trying to deal with medical insurance, and we did a special one-time stipend to our employees, which is why you then see in 26, it drops considerably. Part of that is because of the, $5.4 million that we, in one-time funds. Part of that, again, is that those balances are just coming down. Expenses are higher. Like I said, we've given the raise essentially out of the carry forward, so that's impacting us. The other part that is impacting our budget, so there's 2 things that we're dealing with this year. And we'll deal with some in the next budget too. Over the years, and this has gone on for a considerable amount of years, we have paid for various positions out of cash accounts. And one of the strategies we've utilized over the past couple of years is that we had really, really high balances in things like indirect costs, civics or rental monies, and our self-insurance trust, which is where we pay for medical insurance, our property casualty insurance, and workers' compensation. We had really significant balances in there, and the governing board said, you gotta work on bringing those down. So one of the strategies we had is, okay, we're gonna use those cash accounts, and that's gonna free up some M&O dollars for us to be able to give raises, especially in the tough years during COVID when we're only getting 2% inflation from the state, yet inflation is like 8-9%. We used some of those dollars to help be able to give raises. Well, you can bring down those balances, which is great, but at some point, if your expenses exceeds your revenue, that brings those balances down. You at some point have to make a course correction here. And that's really the point that we're at. So right now, there is several $1 million out of cash accounts that we have to move. We know that for the 26-27 budget, 3.9 of that has got to get out of there and go back to M&O. We can adjust that a little bit and move some this year and then tackle the rest the following year. But we're gonna have to get cash. We're gonna have to get positions out of cash accounts. The other part of it is that we have not, from our M&O budget, fully funded our property casualty insurance because we had a really significant balance. And we've brought that down to that account has about $1 million in it, and our property casualty is about 2.5 to 2.6 million. So we are saying we have to at least increase that by $500,000 next year, what we pay, but knowing that for the following year, we're gonna have to get that up even further. So because of that, when you take those cash accounts and what we've gotta move, and you take the reduction in M&O because of enrollment decreases, we're looking at a budget gap of 7.7 that we have to address right away. But we know that 8.9 is to address the full thing. So when you see like this varying range, it's really the range of what has to happen, which is 7.7, or if we were to address the whole thing, which is not the recommendation we're making, it would be 8.9. This just kind of gives you an idea. We use essentially 4 different accounts to pay for things. So Medicaid we've been using to help offset rising special ed costs. Civic Center is paying for some facilities workers. Community education, they're a separate fund, but we take a portion of their revenue and we've used that to pay for some of our expenses. And then indirect cost is the biggest one. And indirect cost is essentially paying for most of the HR, finance, payroll department. So some people have said, well, just cut those positions. I mean, we got to have a payroll department and a finance department and an HR department. So they're not positions that we can just eliminate to save those dollars. But that kind of shows you how we went to, those counts were sitting on $7 million balance, and they're getting down to, you know, $1 million. That's why we have to address them. This just looks at what are we paying out of. Like I said, there's 16, just over 16 folks out of facilities. I mean, these are like grounds workers, facility, your custodians, those type of people. Finance, pretty much most of the finance department, a lot of the HR department, and a couple of little random areas. But it's really, the big ones are really facilities, finance, and HR. So we've tried. This isn't like we just waited till this year to say we got to work on cutting costs. We've been working on this for the last couple of years. We've made a lot of reductions within the district office, about $1.4 million. Special education has done a lot of work to get off of contracted services and actually employ folks, which is better for kids, but it's also better for our bottom line. So that's a big savings. This last year, for the budget we're in this year, we told departments, you got to cut. You got to cut your budgets. Figure out how you can cut them. So we had savings within that. Like I said, we saw some departments that cut their budget by 47%. There are some things we can't cut. We are required by law to have a district audit. That goes up every single year. I have no choice. It is what it is. There's some things like that we don't have a choice over, but we are really saying to our departments, look at what you're doing, see where you can make cuts. And then we moved the sole principal. We absorbed that with the community education director, so that was also a big savings. Really what comes down to our budget situation is the declining enrollment. We've declined 6,000 students since 2010. We've been using cash accounts to help out with financial needs, and that was a good strategy back then when, you know, we had excess accounts and needed to be able to provide for our teachers and get staff in, but it's not sustainable. Arizona is not great at funding public education. We're one of the lowest, if not the lowest. Kind of fluctuates, but so we deal with that. We are constantly looking for cost-saving measures. Our interest-based negotiation groups, which are basically our four employee groups, have been meeting. We met again last night. We're going to be taking to the board on the 20th, next Tuesday, a list of a whole lot more places to look at. They're not always positive things. They're not always, again, when you're talking about most of our budget is salaries, they are going to impact people, unfortunately. But we're looking at other things, and we keep looking at it. And then, like I said, the reality is that we have an enrollment issue, but we also have the issue of we've been paying for some things out of cash that can no longer sustain that. So, thank you. Not the most glorious, uplifting message for the day, but kind of the reality we're in.
Income outside of the state funding formula?
Sure. There's a couple things we can look at. One of the areas is, the easiest area is within Civic Center or rentals. We have really great facilities, so we're really looking at how we can use that. There's pros and cons to it though, right? If you have people on your field every single day, that makes an impact on your grass and how it looks. It also makes an impact on buildings. We have some buildings that are maybe not needed anymore or that could provide some rental opportunities. So a couple cases in point. One of the options we're looking at is right now the Human Resources and Finance Department is at a different location from here. They're about a mile away at what we call Main Street. We have a potential buyer who's interested in it. I don't think it's a secret that Scottsdale is very interested in it. And we're looking at our situation here and our floor plans saying we don't necessarily have to have that building. We can move people out of that building. We can, if the city is willing to buy it, we can sell that to them, which generates some revenue. The revenue that it generates does not go into M&O or make it so that we can pay salaries. The revenue that it generates has to go what's in called a plant fund, which is used for capital items. But we could do, we're moving more capital funds to M&O to help build that up. Again, this is one-time funding, so it does mean we could use some of that for capital items, which frees up a little bit of the capital budget to go back to M&O. So that's one option. We're looking at, do we need to keep catering at Oak as well as community ed and some other programs at our Oak campus, which is right across the street from Coronado. And there are some folks that are also interested in renting that out. So we're looking at, maybe we move them to another location and we rent that facility out. Same thing, it has to go into like a lease, long-term lease, but that's revenue coming in for capital that could free up capital dollars. And then we're looking at what do we do with Pima and Echo, and are there some revenue generating ideas there as well? So that's really our two opportunities, is what do we do with properties that don't necessarily have students on them, and then what do we do with, what programs, what partnerships can we do that could also maybe bring dollars in?
Speaking of bringing dollars in, if you were to sell that property on Main Street, I know that it sounds like you would want to put that into capital or M&O, but that's just a Band-Aid. So are you, I'm sure you're exploring other options for investments in revenue generating options if you were to sell Main Street with that money?
So if we sell Main Street, we are required to put it into what's called plant fund. That's where it has to go. That can be used for capital expenses, but it cannot be used to pay people. We're limited on how we can invest.
Unless there's a statutory change,
Yeah.
it goes into plant fund, which can only be used for capital. At one point, Representative Gress said he was going to introduce legislation that would allow schools to use proceeds from the sale of district assets for M&O purposes, but we don't have that authorization, nor has legislation that, at least as of yesterday, I haven't seen anything introduced by him that would allow us to do that. So a sale of a property goes into plant fund, can only be used for that. So unlike with DAA, District Additional Assistance, where we can take that state money and move it to M&O, so you can use it for people, you cannot move plant fund for that purpose. And so even if you're generating money from an investment account, it's still tied to the plant fund. Interest earnings, we can't move that into M&O expenses. So it's better for us to find lease opportunities to generate revenue. So you think the Civic Center Fund that has funded some of those positions in the cash accounts Shannon talked about, those lease opportunities are more beneficial for us than a one-time sale of an asset. Yeah. So with the exception of Main Street, I don't believe we should recommend selling an asset. Main Street's kind of an anomaly, in part because that was acquired in a land swap with the city. They got Apache Park, we got Main Street. It worked for us. They would like it back. Now they need to pay fair market value if they want it back. But we could do some other things with district assets and not need that. And that location is not going to result in a school being built there. So the other thing that we're very cognizant of is school properties being repurposed for charter school purposes undermines ADM. So we don't want to rent to competitors. That's just not a smart business proposition. So what's the right complementary use of facilities that are repurposed that are compatible with the community in which the school is located, generate revenue to allow us to maintain the asset, in an ideal space, generate revenue that allow us to invest in other programs and support for SUSD services. So that's the goal with repurposing. There's a lot of dominoes in this. Main Street's one piece, and Pima and Echo, we have ideas for what that repurposing will look like. It's really premature to think about the next two buildings, but those are always in the back of our mind. What might that look like in terms of value added that's compatible with the neighborhood? Senator Kavanaugh has introduced Senate Bill 1080, that would allow for public-private partnerships to build workforce housing. And I, at least as of today, don't see that in current buildings that we're talking about repurposing, but I could see that conversation at Apache or maybe at Choya, where you have district assets that have not been used at schools by the district for a very, very long period of time. We've got a bus garage at Apache and some of our transportation department. But you might be able to do some things there that could create a revenue stream that would give us more flexibility. And so if that bill passes, then we have some additional options on the table.
Which one, Kavanaugh or Gress?
Kavanaugh. So I haven't seen anything from Gress on the move the money to M&O. But even in that scenario, it's one-time revenue that could be used for M&O. It's a Band-Aid. It's not a long-term structural solution. Kavanaugh's creates a structural solution for underutilized district resources, and not only here, but all across the state. And so that one is the one, Senate Bill 1080, that it may need some tweaks. I can't speak to the specific language, but conceptually, it allows for workforce housing that would benefit not only school employees, but first responders, so police, fire, health workers. You think about other individuals who sometimes struggle to be able to live in our community, but they work in our community. You might be able to create opportunities for them to live in properties that are repurposed through a public-private partnership. Yes, we could benefit.
I loved hearing about the math behind all of these processes that you do, but what can we bring back to our communities that will really make change? So I know that we can support and educate people on bonds and overrides, but understanding the math, I feel a little helpless in how can I help you move numbers or our communities?
The biggest way to move numbers, we need kids, and the best way to get kids to enroll in our school. I could talk about how great our schools all are today. Christine Harrington can talk about how great our schools are. You having that conversation with your friends and your neighbors of, oh my gosh, Coach Cheese is rocking it, and here's how they're rocking it, and man, your kids would love it over here. Get your kids. That's the best way we can get kids to enroll in our schools. We can send home pamphlets all day and mailers all day. And we can talk about how fantastic our schools are and promote our story. But the most meaningful story is the story that you tell your friend and your neighbor who just moved in down the street about, oh my gosh, let me tell you about how much my kid loves the school. And that's how we drive up enrollment. There are some things that, I know I live in South Scottsdale. There are no kids in my neighborhood. There are literally no kids. There just aren't. So there's some things that we're gonna fight a battle anyways, just because of declining or just because of lower birth rates, and it's expensive to live in Scottsdale. But there are a lot of kids that aren't picking our schools, so we need help getting them into our schools when they're not already picking. Some of the things we talk about is, well, if we open up this program, we'll get kids in, which could be true, but if we're taking kids from school A to school B that we already had, that doesn't help the problem. We need the kids who aren't already at our schools. And you all are the best to help get those kids by talking about how great. One of the things we tell our employees too is when you're out to dinner, you don't know who's sitting at the table next to you. Don't be sitting at dinner talking smack about the district and saying, oh my gosh, they're horrible. And that doesn't help promote us. And you don't know who's listening at the table around you. We have to talk about the great stuff that happens. And the best people to talk about the great stuff that happens are your kids and you as parents who see it every single day.
So,
oh yeah,
I was also going to add the other thing that you could bring to your parents is come to our February meeting or listen to it. We're going to have Alexis Sussdorf give kind of a primer on what the legislature is doing, and then how you as an individual can educate yourself on what they're doing, and should you choose to, how you can engage with your elected representatives on various issues.
And there will hopefully be an initiative on the ballot in November to pass a bond. And that's really important, especially as we're moving capital over to M&O to be able to keep doing that. We're going to need bond money to fix some things. I said the HVAC units. Well, the HVAC units, right? We spent several $100,000 on generators and replace or like loaner HVAC units at several schools this year. That comes out of M&O because we need to buy new ones, but I gotta wait for the bond to get passed to be able to buy those. So there's expenses that are coming out of M&O to bandage things that if we had a bond, we could just replace those units and not have that cost coming out of M&O. We don't have a set amount yet. We are working through that. Dennis has gone to, oh my God, what did he say? Like more than 50 community meetings and school meetings in the last few months. He's almost done, but he's still got several more he's doing. But he is hitting every single school. He's talking to staff, he's talking to parents, he's putting out surveys. He's collecting all this data of like, what do you see as the need for your school? And then once he gets all of that, and we've also, security said, here's some things, measures we think, transportation, buses and what they need, technology, what they need. That will then all get priced out, and then we'll have a dollar amount. So I don't have a dollar amount for you yet.
So mine is a two-part question on the attendance 100-day count. One, if a student leaves one SUSD school, sorry, not 10-day count, 100-day count.
Yeah.
If they leave one SUSD school and go to another SUSD school within those 100 days, we still get those funds?
Yeah, because you're just going from one school to
Okay.
another. The ADM shifts from one school to the other, but it's still
And
within
then
the
my
district.
second question, with the closure and the information closure about phase 1 and then the possibility of phase 2, have you noticed, and maybe this is an attendance person question, have we lost some students based on already within the 100 days? Do we know what that number looks like?
So we've had a handful, 5, probably less than 10, that have, particularly from Echo Canyon, gone back to their home schools. So we had a student from Buckeye who was coming to Echo Canyon, went back to Buckeye. So we were tracking all of that data, but so far, the ones that have left are generally ones that live in the outlying parts of the community and have made that transition earlier. The other thing that we've seen is that kids have moved within the district. So you'll have some Pima families who've already gone to Navajo or already gone to Kiva. So they got a jump on. Instead of waiting to finish this year and move, they moved at the semester. So you've seen that, but it's just a handful that have actually gone back to their home district from those 2 schools, Pima and Echo.
And within any given year, there's movement that ends up happening.
Okay, probably 1 or 2 more questions. Or none.
I emailed them my question. How do out-of-district students benefit us if we have fixed dollar amounts that come in and ADM? If we got rid of all the out-of-district students, wouldn't our in-district students have a higher spend per child?
No, because it doesn't matter if you're in our district or out of our district, we still get a specific dollar amount per student. So having those kiddos come into our school helps our enrollment, helps our ADM. So we're getting funding for them. The question is does it come from a state aid account or does it, I mean, it's all coming from taxes, so.
But it doesn't come from the state aid account. So what's different,
Yeah.
this is why people ask that question and understand why. We are non-state aid district. The property wealth in Scottsdale and the valuation is so high that we collect the money locally. So the state doesn't have to write us a check. They set how much we can collect per pupil. So they set the revenue control limit. So it doesn't matter if they're out of district or not. The ADM is the ADM, and that's our revenue control limit. So the school funding formula is the rate limiter here, not our relative property wealth. The difference is that if you're in other communities, the state's writing you a check because they're not generating enough property taxes to cover the amount that's been obligated. I would call it as a donor district. Our property values are so high, we're contributing to be able to help cover the cost for others. So for us, the end game is you got to grow your enrollment in order to generate more revenue. So absent a statutory change on how funding's done, the ADM needs to go up. If we were just serving our own, we would get no material benefit. We would just actually have that much less revenue. And 25% of our enrollment are out-of-district kids this year. It's a fair question. Lots of people ask it, and you scratch your head and say, well, can't you just, given our relative property wealth, you add a tenth of a mil, you could generate a lot of money, but the issue is you can't. We've maximized every lever that we have in state statute with the DAA and the M&O override to get more money. So there is not another provision in state statute for SUSD outside of growing enrollment to generate more.
I think that's a misnomer across the entire state, too. I think parents in other communities go, oh, well, Scottsdale's a higher wealth area, so their kids get more, and I get the same amount for the kid that you get. Actually, at the lower income school, you're getting a whole bunch of grants that I'm not getting. So I think that it doesn't matter if you're wealthy district or not wealthy district. You still get the same amount per student. It just matters on.
What does matter, though, and it is a point of differentiation, is that when you look at a bond issue, we could consider a flat rate across our community because the valuations go up over time, and they have historically. So even when we do a bond, we may not have to increase the rate in order to generate substantial money for the next decade. So that's different. If you're in other communities, if you're in Mesa and other places, they're paying twice as much to cover their obligations as we are in terms of the rate that's levied for taxpayers. So our rate is relatively low, and because of increases in valuation, we may not have to increase the rate in order to generate the money for the bond. So that's the advantage in Scottsdale, and we have extraordinary facilities as a result of the generosity of the community. That is a place where we get a benefit that others may not, but from a maintenance and operating perspective, how you pay people, that's all tied to kids.
You had, I think, more questions, but we have that on our list to work through.
Thank you so much, both of you. This is always a really complicated process. You do a good job making it accessible. Okay, so do any school representatives have any announcements they'd like to share? Okay, so tomorrow night, if you are on a PTO or PTA or APT at your school, please check in with your president and make sure they are aware. There is a Zoom roundtable on Thursday night. It is very important for how parent organizations do outreach to new families. It may not apply, I'm learning, to all schools, but it's, pretty important.
I can speak to that a little bit. All of your PTOs are able to access, usually over the summer and around the beginning of the year, the big list of all the emails of all the parents. So at the beginning of the year, they can send a mass email, and they're able to reach everyone and generate funds and get communications out. Well, there's a piece of legislation that passed that now says they cannot get those. And just think about the impact of that for a second. So if they're not able to get a list, if SUSD is not able to give them the parent list at the beginning of the year, you're kind of dead in the water as a PTO. So, and so I don't know if all the presidents understand that that's what's at stake. They will next August when they try to get the list. But if we can get ahead of it and we can get some traction and movement now, the more support the better for this, because then we can maybe get it fixed before that happens. So if you are in communication with any of your presidents, please communicate to them how important this call is. Okay, thanks.
And just so you know, the involvement of this can be, it's not like you can send emails and you can call, right? You're not gonna have to like take off work, but to engage, we do need some of your time and energy with it. But yeah, so please spread the word. I have emailed all of the board, all of the parent organization presidents at every school, but please help get the word out. Okay, so our February general meeting will be a very similar topic. It'll be a general legislative update with respect to public education in the state. And Alexis is the district's lobbyist, and she's very knowledgeable of like, here's what the legislature is, here's what they do. If you as an individual want to interact with the legislature, here's how you do it and recommendations for it. It's a very informative meeting every year. She's great at kind of demystifying what happens down at the Capitol. Okay, our March meeting is going to be on sports, and we'll have the SUSD athletic director as the speaker for that one. Our April meeting is going to be on site councils, and I haven't put the subtitle here because it's a panel, but it's going to be what they are, who is on them, and what they do. And so we'll hear from Dr. Sakos and Dr. Banau, Dr. Dansky from Arcadia, Ms. Humman from Pueblo, Ms. Perry from Yavapai, and Ms. Hardy from Mountainside. And then our final general meeting of the year will be Fine Arts and CTE. And we haven't had this for, I think, about 3 years, but this is a really interesting meeting because there's a lot of really cool things that happen in both CTE and Fine Arts, and you'll get to learn all about them. Okay, there is math curriculum that is still on review here in MDA, both for K through 11, and if it isn't yet, it'll also be for the upper level math curriculum too, because they had their vendor presentation meeting on Monday. But yeah, if you're interested in looking at any math curriculum materials and weighing in on them, you can do that here at MDA. Our budget update, the only thing that happened between now and December was we had one grant donation and then our email recurring monthly fee posted. And thank you so much. So I hope to see a bunch of people on Thursday night on Zoom, and then everybody again in February.